It was New Year's Eve in New York City, and the energy in the air was electric. Mike and I had just spent the night celebrating downtown, watching the fireworks light up the sky. By the time we got back to our building, it was almost 2 a.m., and both of us were beyond exhausted. The elevator ride to our floor felt unusually long, the old building groaning as it hauled us upward. When the doors finally slid open, I almost stumbled out, ready to crash into bed. That's when I saw her. She was at the far end of the hallway near the window, a woman barefoot wearing a torn white dress that looked like it had been through hell. Her back was to us, and she was just standing there, not moving, not making a sound. "Do you see her?" I whispered, grabbing Mike's arm. "Yeah, probably just someone drunk," he muttered, trying to brush it off. As we walked toward our apartment at the end of the hall, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She looked like a statue, perfectly still except for her head. It tilted slightly, like she was listening to something. When we got to our door, I fumbled with the keys, trying to ignore the heavy feeling settling in my chest. That's when Mike stopped and turned to her. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out. She didn't respond at first, just stood there. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward us. Her face came into view under the flickering hallway light. She smiled. No, it wasn't a smile. It was more like a grimace, wide and unnatural, her teeth stained red. "Mike," I hissed, yanking him toward the door. "She's probably just..." He trailed off as the woman let out a low, guttural laugh. It wasn't loud, but it crawled under my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand up. Before I could pull him inside, she raised her hand and pointed to the wall next to our door. There, scrawled in what looked like red paint, was a strange mark, a cross with jagged lines surrounding it. "You're on the list," she whispered, her voice raspy and broken. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mike, what the hell was that?" I asked, pacing the living room. "She's just some crazy person," he said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. "Let's just go to bed and deal with it tomorrow." Reluctantly, I followed him to the bedroom, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. Every little sound in the building made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the radiator. It all felt louder, sharper. And then the knocking started. It was soft at first, like someone tapping their fingernails on the door. Mike sat up, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I asked, clutching the blanket. He nodded. "Stay here." "Are you kidding me?" I yelled, grabbing his arm, but he shook me off and went to check. Looking through the peephole, he froze. "There's no one there," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. I could hear something else too, a scratching sound like nails dragging against the wood. "Mike, come back," I called, but before he could move, a blood-curdling scream tore through the hallway. "They're here!" a voice shrieked, echoing through the walls. Mike flung the door open, and there she was, the woman kneeling on the floor, her hands covering her face. She was sobbing, mumbling something I couldn't make out. "Hey!" Mike shouted. "What do you want?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her head, her eyes wild and unfocused. "Run," she whispered, her voice trembling, and then she lunged. Her body hit the ground, crawling toward us with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. Her hands and feet dragged along the floor as she let out an unholy, guttural growl. "Sarah, go!" Mike yelled, slamming the door shut. We grabbed our jackets and bolted down the stairs, her laughter echoing behind us. The next morning, we returned to the building with one of the security guards. My stomach churned as we walked back to our floor, half expecting to see her again. But she was gone. All that was left were faint smudges of red near our door. "Weird," the guard said, frowning as he checked the cameras. "The footage from last night's down. Must have been a glitch." "Convenient," Mike muttered under his breath. As the guard left, one of our neighbors approached us. "You heard it too, right?" she asked. "Heard what?" I replied. "The screams, the footsteps. My husband said he saw a woman in the hallway, but when he looked again, she was gone." Later, Mike and I went to the front desk, desperate for answers. The old doorman, Mr. Grayson, gave us a knowing look. "She's been here before," he said, leaning in close. 50 years ago, a woman was murdered in this building, stabbed by her boyfriend on New Year's Eve. They say she crawled through the hallway trying to get help, but no one came. Now every year she shows up looking for the next victim. My blood ran cold as he continued. "That mark on your door? The cops used to put it on the apartments of people they thought were suspects. When we got back to our apartment, there was a piece of paper under the door. In shaky handwriting it read, 'She'll be back next year.'" It all started on New Year's Eve. My buddy Logan had asked me to house sit for him while he went off to celebrate in Hawaii. He needed someone to watch over his dog, Max, and I figured, why not? Logan's house was cozy, tucked in a quiet neighborhood in Connecticut, surrounded by tall trees. Plus, I thought it'd be nice to spend the night there with my girlfriend, Emily. Just us, the fireplace, and Max. Sounded perfect. When we arrived, Max greeted us with his usual energy, tail wagging and barking. Logan had left a bunch of instructions, mostly about Max's feeding times and where the spare keys were hidden. Emily and I got settled in quickly. The house felt warm, and the vibe was peaceful, or so I thought. Around 9 p.m., things started feeling off. Max began acting weird, growling low while staring at the living room window. I got up to check, but there was nothing outside. Maybe he heard a raccoon or something. I laughed it off, but Emily didn't look convinced. "It's probably just the wind or an animal," I said, trying to reassure her. She nodded, but her eyes kept darting to the window. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. Not a loud one, but enough to make Max go nuts again. I peeked through the peephole and saw a woman standing there. She was maybe in her mid-30s, blonde, wearing a hoodie and jeans. She looked normal, but something about her felt off. "Hi," she said when I cracked the door open a bit. "I'm Logan's girlfriend. I forgot some of my things upstairs. Can I grab them real quick?" Emily stood behind me, giving me that "what the hell" look. Logan never mentioned a girlfriend, but maybe it slipped his mind. I hesitated, but the woman smiled nervously, like she was embarrassed about showing up so late. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. "Just be quick." She walked in like she owned the place. Max barked at her nonstop, but she ignored him, heading straight upstairs. She was back down in less than 2 minutes, clutching a small pouch. "Thanks," she said, giving us a polite smile before walking out into the night. Emily was fuming. "Why the hell would you let her in?" she asked. "Logan never said he had a girlfriend." "I don't know," I shot back. She seemed harmless, and what was I supposed to do? Argue with her on the porch? Max barked again, staring at the door even after she'd left. It gave me chills, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe I just made a dumb decision. Later that night, around midnight, I texted Logan to check in. "Hey, did your girlfriend grab her stuff tonight?" I asked, keeping it casual. The reply came almost immediately. "What girlfriend?" Logan texted back. "I don't have a girlfriend." My stomach dropped. Emily saw the message over my shoulder and immediately said, "I told you something's not right." Now I was freaked out. I double-checked every door and window, making sure they were locked. The idea that I'd let a total stranger into Logan's house made my skin crawl. Emily wanted to leave, but I convinced her to stay. It was late, and driving back to the city would take over an hour. "Let's just stick it out until morning," I said. "We'll be fine." Around 3 a.m., Max went ballistic again. This time it wasn't just barking. He was growling and pacing by the front door. Emily and I froze when we heard soft footsteps outside. Then, a faint knock. "Don't answer it," Emily whispered, clutching my arm. I didn't plan to. Instead, I peeked through the window. 2 figures were standing on the porch. The woman from earlier, and a man. The guy was tall, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. They weren't knocking anymore, just standing there, talking in hushed voices. My phone was in my hand before I even realized it, dialing 911. But before I could press call, the door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Emily and I bolted upstairs to the bedroom, locking ourselves in. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation to the 911 operator. Meanwhile, the footsteps moved around the house. I could hear them testing the windows, trying to find a way in. "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Officers are on their way." It felt like forever, but finally I heard the sound of sirens. The figures outside must have heard them too because the noises stopped. When I peeked out the window, they were gone. The police searched the area but didn't find anyone. What they did find was unsettling: a key near the broken window in the living room. Logan later confirmed it was an old spare key he thought he'd lost months ago. The cops told us we were lucky. "Could have been worse," one officer said. Emily didn't want to hear it. She just wanted to leave, and honestly, I didn't blame her. The next day, Logan came back early, furious about what had happened. He changed all the locks and installed security cameras immediately. But for me and Emily, the damage was done. That night left a mark on both of us. I still think about the woman's smile. So polite, so normal. And yet, she'd probably planned everything from the start. It makes me wonder how many people out there wear masks like that, pretending to be something they're not. All I know is, next time someone knocks on my door, they're not getting in. It was New Year's Eve 2016, and I was hosting a party in my new apartment in New York. It wasn't a huge place, but it had enough room to fit about 30 people, maybe more if people didn't mind being a little cozy. My girlfriend Claire and I had been planning this for weeks. We invited our close friends and told them they could bring whoever they wanted. The only rule? Respect our space, no trashing the place. While setting up for the party, things started getting weird. I mean, at first it was small stuff. I couldn't find the remote, and Claire swore she'd left her phone on the counter, but it was suddenly on the couch. We were rushing around, so we figured it was just us being forgetful. But then it kept happening, like a lot. One minute my wallet was on the table, and the next it was in the bedroom. It was kind of creeping us out, but we laughed it off. Maybe we were just stressed. By the time the guests started arriving, it was around 9 p.m. Friends poured in along with a handful of strangers, friends of friends. You know how these things go. I didn't mind as long as people behaved. I had set up some cameras in the living room and bedrooms just in case. Not because I didn't trust my friends, but, well, you never know with a crowd like this. That's when I first noticed him, a tall guy in a gray trench coat. He didn't seem to know anyone, or at least he wasn't really talking to anyone. I figured he was probably just shy or maybe a little awkward. I asked one of my buddies, Nick, if he knew him, and Nick just shrugged, saying, "I think he came with Sarah." Okay, cool. No big deal. The night went on and everyone was having a good time, but those little disappearances kept happening. My new watch, a gift from Claire, vanished from the dresser. I wanted to show it off, but it was just gone. Then I noticed my bedroom window was open. Strange. It was freezing outside, and we definitely didn't leave it open. I brushed it off. After all, I was hosting a party. Who had time to worry about stuff like that? It was getting close to midnight, and everyone gathered around the TV for the countdown. The room was buzzing, people laughing, shouting, and clinking glasses. I looked around, making sure everyone was having a good time, but something caught my eye. The guy in the gray trench coat was standing in the corner facing the wall. He wasn't watching the TV or talking to anyone. He was just standing there. At first I thought maybe he was on his phone or something, but no. His hands were in his pockets. He wasn't doing anything, just staring at the wall like a total creep. I was about to ask Nick again who this guy was, but then the countdown started. Everyone joined in, 10, 9, 8, and I got swept up in it too. Midnight hit, and the room exploded with cheers and hugs. Couples kissed, champagne popped, and the noise was deafening. By the time the excitement died down, I looked back at the corner. The guy was gone. "Hey, Nick," I asked, "where's that dude in the trench coat?" Nick looked confused. What dude? The tall guy, gray coat. You said he came with Sarah. Nick shook his head. No idea, man. Never seen him before tonight. Before I could respond, Claire came down the stairs, looking annoyed. That guy, she said. He's locked himself in the bathroom. He won't come out. I told her to just use the master bathroom, figuring the guy probably had too much to drink. Claire rolled her eyes and went back upstairs. By 2 a.m., most of the guests had left. It was just a few close friends hanging out, but Claire and I were exhausted. We decided to do a quick check around the apartment to make sure nothing was missing before heading to bed. That's when Claire noticed her purse was gone. Seriously? She said, frustration creeping into her voice. I ran to the bedroom to check the cameras. Sure enough, there he was, the guy in the gray coat on camera, rifling through our stuff in the guest room. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There he was, bold as anything, going through our drawers, our stuff. My blood was boiling. I clipped a 30-second portion of the footage and sent it to Nick. Yo, your friend just robbed us, I texted, attaching the video. Nick replied almost instantly. Dude, that's not my friend. I don't even know who that is. I stared at my phone, feeling my stomach drop. If Nick didn't know him, then who the hell was this guy? I went back to the footage, rewinding it. The guy was in the guest room, digging through Claire's purse. He opened the window and started dropping stuff outside. Her purse, my watch, even a small jewelry box Claire kept in her dresser. My heart was racing as I fast-forwarded the video, trying to see where he went next. That's when I saw it. He stopped. His head snapped up like he'd heard something. Then, without missing a beat, he crawled under the bed. Under the bed. The same bed Claire and I were sitting on, watching the footage. I froze. Claire glanced at me, confused. What? What's wrong? I couldn't say anything. My throat felt like it was closing up. Slowly, I turned to her and whispered, "He's under the bed." Claire's eyes widened. No, he's not. You're messing with me." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "He's under the bed. Right now." Claire started to panic, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Before I could stop her, she let out a scream. A loud, piercing scream. "Claire!" I hissed, trying to calm her down. "We need to get out of here, now!" I grabbed her arm and whispered, "On the count of 3, we run. Don't stop, don't look back, got it?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. 1, 2... Before I could say 3, Claire bolted, throwing the door open and sprinting down the hallway. I scrambled to follow, but not before glancing under the bed. Big mistake. He was there staring at me. His face was pale, almost gray, with sunken eyes that locked onto mine. For a split second, we made eye contact. Then he grinned, a slow, deliberate grin that made my skin crawl. I slammed the door shut and ran after Claire. We burst into the kitchen, both of us grabbing the largest knives we could find. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped mine. "Call the cops!" Claire yelled, her voice breaking. I fumbled with my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "There's someone in our apartment," I shouted. "He's in the bedroom. He's hiding under the bed." The dispatcher promised to send officers immediately. We stood there, clutching our knives, too scared to move. 3 minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, we heard the knock at the door. "Police!" I ran to let them in, practically dragging the officers toward the bedroom. "He's in there," I said, pointing at the door. One officer opened the door cautiously while the other covered him, gun drawn. They searched the room, checking under the bed, the closet, even the window. "He's gone," the officer said, shining his flashlight under the bed. "No way," I said, my voice cracking. "I saw him under there. He was right there." The officer pointed to the open window. "Looks like he escaped." Claire and I stared at each other, stunned. How did he get past us? The police took our statement and reviewed the footage. They promised to send the video to their department to get a better look at the guy's face. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't find him. And I was right. The next few days were a blur. Claire couldn't sleep, and honestly, neither could I. Every little sound made me jump. I double-checked the locks, installed extra security cameras, and even bought a baseball bat to keep by the bed. But none of it made us feel safe. The cops never found him. They said the footage was too grainy to get a clear ID. All we had was a blurry image of a tall guy in a trench coat. A week later, one of my neighbors stopped me in the hallway. "Hey," she said, "I saw a weird guy hanging around your door on New Year's Eve. Tall, wearing a gray coat. I thought he was one of your guests." My stomach dropped. "Did you see where he went?" She shook her head. "No, but I've seen him before, around the building, usually late at night." I thanked her, but it didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. This guy wasn't just some random thief. He'd been watching us. And then, the final straw. One night, as I was locking up, I noticed something on the windowsill of the guest room. A single glove. It was gray and worn, like the kind you'd wear with a trench coat. I stared at it for what felt like forever before slamming the window shut. We moved out a month later. Coming home for winter break wasn't supposed to feel this weird, but it did. College had become my world. Late night parties, cramming for finals, and dorm life. But now, back in my old room with its creaky bed and posters I hadn't touched since high school, I felt like a guest in my own house. New Year's Eve was the one thing keeping me sane. It was the one night I could escape the awkward family dinners and the endless questions about how school was going. My best friends Matt and Ethan were my lifeline. That afternoon, Matt hit me up with an idea that sounded way too good to be true. "I got us an invite to a killer party," he said. "Some girl I matched with on Tinder, Lauren. It's supposed to be exclusive. Warehouse downtown." "Warehouse?" Ethan raised an eyebrow when I told him later. "It's edgy. You're just scared of anything that's not a house party," I teased. By 9 p.m., we were 3 beers deep in my basement, laughing about old times. The address Lauren gave Matt wasn't in the best part of town, but we didn't care. A party was a party. Matt texted her before we left to make sure everything was still good. "She says it's legit," he said, showing us her reply. The words, "Can't wait to see you," glowed on his screen. We called an Uber and piled in, splitting the fare like broke college kids do. The ride was quiet. As we got closer, the streets got darker, quieter. When we pulled up, the place looked wrong. The warehouse was huge but run down, with graffiti on the walls and no signs of life except for a single dim light above the entrance. "This is it?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. Matt double-checked the address. "Yeah, this is it." The driver looked at us through the rearview mirror. "You sure you want to go here?" "We're good," Matt said, and we stepped out into the cold. The guy at the door was massive, 6'5", easy, with arms that could have snapped us in half. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward the open door behind him. "Thanks, man," Matt said, trying to sound cool. Inside, the air felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. The hallway was long and narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb. We could hear faint music thumping from somewhere ahead. When we stepped into the main room, I immediately felt out of place. The lights were dim, mostly from cheap strobes that flickered erratically, casting long, jittery shadows. The music was loud, not upbeat, but this strange, hypnotic rhythm that made my chest feel tight. There weren't a lot of people, maybe 20 or 30, but the vibe was all wrong. Nobody was dancing. Most of them stood in small groups, talking quietly or just watching. And here's the kicker. There were no women. "Where's Lauren?" I shouted over the music. Matt pulled out his phone and typed furiously. A second later, he said, "She's in the back. Told us to come through those double doors." Ethan and I exchanged a look. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. "We'll check it out," Matt said, already heading toward the doors. We followed him, weaving through the clusters of guys, all of whom seemed to watch us a little too closely. By the time we reached the double doors, I felt like we were walking into a trap. The hallway beyond was worse than the first. Narrower, darker, lined with doors that were all slightly ajar. The air smelled like mildew and something faintly metallic. "I don't like this," Ethan whispered. "Relax," Matt said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. We didn't make it far before one of the doors creaked open, and a man stepped out. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. He leaned in close to Matt and whispered something. Matt froze. "What did he say?" I asked. Matt turned to us, his face pale. "We need to leave, now." Matt didn't wait for us to ask more questions. He spun around and started walking back toward the double doors, his pace quickening with every step. "What the hell did that guy say?" Ethan asked, trying to keep up. "He said we had to leave before midnight," Matt muttered. "He said they're gonna lock everyone in." "Lock everyone in for what?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "I don't know, and I'm not sticking around to find out," Matt snapped. As we pushed through the double doors and back into the main room, it felt like the entire vibe had shifted. The music was louder, the lights more erratic, and the stares, those cold, calculating stares, were more intense. "We need to go," I said, trying to keep calm. Matt was already leading the way toward the exit, but as we passed through the clusters of people, one of them stepped in front of us. "Leaving so soon?" the guy asked. He was tall and wiry with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I got somewhere to be," Matt said, trying to brush past him. The guy didn't move. "You just got here. Stay. Enjoy the party." "We're good, thanks," Ethan said, stepping forward, his voice shaky but firm. For a second, it looked like the guy was going to grab Matt, but then a voice boomed from across the room. "Let them go," it said. It was the doorman, still standing at his post. The wiry guy hesitated, then stepped aside. We didn't waste any time. As soon as we hit the hallway, we started running. The moment our feet hit the concrete outside, the cold air slapped us in the face. It was a sharp contrast to the stifling heat and tension inside. But we weren't safe yet. As we ran through the empty parking lot, I heard footsteps behind us, heavy, deliberate. "They're following us," Ethan panted. Matt turned back briefly. "Run faster!" he shouted. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were going to collapse, but I didn't stop. I could hear the guy behind us shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words. We hit the street, the faint glow of a street lamp giving us our first sense of relief. But it was short-lived. A black SUV screeched to a halt a few yards away, its headlights blinding. "Keep going," Matt yelled. We darted down an alley, the sound of the SUV's engine roaring behind us. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. Finally, we stumbled out onto a main road, gasping for breath. A convenience store stood on the corner, its fluorescent lights like a beacon. "Inside," Matt said, and we burst through the doors. The cashier gave us a startled look as we collapsed near the back of the store, trying to catch our breath. "What happened?" the cashier asked, but none of us answered. Matt pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and ordered an Uber. The three of us sat there in silence until the car arrived, none of us daring to look outside. When the driver finally pulled up, we piled in without a word. "Where to?" he asked. "Just drive," Matt said. We didn't speak a word during the ride back to my house. The car felt like a safe haven, but none of us could shake the feeling that the SUV or someone from that warehouse might still be following us. Matt kept glancing over his shoulder. Ethan stared blankly out the window, and I sat there replaying everything that had just happened, my hands still trembling. When we finally got back, we bolted the door and collapsed onto the couch in my living room. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint sound of fireworks in the distance. Midnight had passed. "What the hell just happened back there?" Ethan finally blurted, breaking the silence. Matt sat forward, his elbows on his knees, running his hands through his hair. "The guy in the hallway, he told me we had to leave before midnight because they were going to lock everyone inside." "Lock them in for what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Matt shook his head. his face pale. I didn't stick around to ask. Ethan stood up and started pacing the room. This wasn't just some sketchy party, man. That place was a trap. No women, no drinks, no real dancing. It was like they were waiting for something. For us. And that guy who tried to stop us? He shuddered. They didn't want us to leave. Or maybe they were waiting for midnight to start whatever the hell they were planning, I added. We sat there, the weight of what could have happened sinking in, the thought of what those people might have done to us, or were about to do to the others still inside, made my stomach churn. Matt pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he said, his voice steady. "Do it anonymously," Ethan urged. Matt nodded, dialing the number. He kept it simple, a vague report about suspicious activity at a warehouse and the possibility of something illegal happening. When he hung up, he let out a shaky breath. "I hope they actually check it out," he said. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented. I hadn't slept much, and when I did, my dreams were a chaotic mix of dark hallways, flashing lights, and heavy footsteps. Matt and Ethan were already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with their phones. "Anything in the news?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Nothing," Matt said, not looking up from his screen. Ethan shook his head. "It's like the place doesn't exist. No raids, no arrests, nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. It felt like whatever had happened at that warehouse had been erased, like it had never even happened. Then Matt's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and froze. "What is it?" I asked. Wordlessly, he handed me the phone. It was a text from an unknown number. "You were lucky. Don't come back." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you think it's them?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. "Who else could it be?" Matt muttered, taking his phone back. We spent the rest of the day in a daze, the tension hanging over us like a storm cloud. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were terrified. That night, just as I was about to go to bed, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, half expecting a message from Matt or Ethan. But it wasn't. It was another unknown number. Some people don't get second chances. Next time you won't. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't reply. I didn't tell Matt or Ethan. I just deleted the message and turned off my phone. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching, waiting. It's been months since that night at the warehouse, but it still haunts me. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow outside my window, it all feels like a reminder, like I didn't really escape. Matt and Ethan tried to move on, but we all know there's a part of that night we'll never leave behind. The unanswered questions gnaw at me. Why us? What would have happened if we'd stayed? And who sent those messages? A few weeks after the incident, I searched the address online again. Same results as before. Nothing. No reports, no investigations, no mention of it anywhere. It's like that place, that night, never existed. One night I couldn't sleep. I found myself scrolling through online forums, the kind that talked about conspiracy theories and urban legends. I stumbled across a thread titled "Warehouse Parties That Turn Deadly," and my chest tightened. The comments were full of stories. People disappearing after attending mysterious parties. Strange figures luring victims to isolated places. Rumors of cults or trafficking rings. Most of it sounded like crazy internet junk, but one post stood out. They use music and lights to disorient you. It's not about the party, it's about the countdown. Midnight is when it all happens. If you make it out, don't ever look back, and if you get a message after, run. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. That was the last time I looked up anything about that night. But just when I thought I could start to forget, I got another text last week. No number, no name. Just 4 words. "We're still watching you." I stared at it for what felt like hours, debating what to do. In the end, I didn't call anyone. What could I say? That I think I escaped some kind of trap but don't know who's behind it or what they wanted. So I'm writing this instead. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's just a way to get it out of my head. But if you're reading this and you ever get invited to a party that feels even slightly off, don't go. Trust your gut. Walk away. And if you do go and things don't feel right, leave. Don't wait for midnight. Don't wait for the countdown. Just run, because some places, some people aren't meant to let you go.